This is an example of a 4-mark question for the Russian-Soviet Union course 1917 to 1941. Now, all of the questions is the first question on the paper, and they'll all be worth 4 marks, and you should spend about 5 or 6 minutes on it. You need to use the sentence starters. What can you infer from the source about whatever the question is, and then how do you know this, referring to the source. Now, this is a classic one. What can we infer about Stalin's view of women from source A? And this is a propaganda poster produced during Stalin's period as leader, and it shows a picture of a woman surrounded by a family. Now, the important thing and how you get 4 marks on a 4-mark question is that you answer the question. What can you infer about Stalin's view of women? Now, the first thing that we can do is we can have a look at what it shows us. So, the first thing it shows us is that we have a woman in the middle, and she has lots and lots of children that are surrounding her. And in the background, she has 2 sons. One is in the uniform of a sailor, and one is in a uniform of a soldier. Now, what can we infer about Stalin's view of women? Now, when you make an inference, you don't just say the obvious. So, for example, what you would do is say, one thing I can infer about Stalin's view of women is that women were expected to have large numbers of children. The second part of the question is, how do you know this? So I know this because the woman in the picture is surrounded by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children. So the picture shows a woman surrounded by 10 children. Therefore, I could infer that Stalin's view of women was that women were supposed to have lots of children. A second inference that I could make, for example, is that women were not supposed to work and they were supposed to stay at home. How do I know this? I know this because the woman isn't dressed as a factory worker, or she isn't dressed as a farmer. She's dressed as a housewife. A third inference I could make was that that Stalin thought that women should raise soldiers to fight for the communists. How do I know this? Because the 2 children in the background, one's dressed as a sailor and one's dressed as a soldier. So this again is a 4-mark question. So this is the first question that you get on the Russia and the Soviet Union paper 1917 to 1941. It's worth 4 marks, and all of the questions will say, what can you infer from about something? Now, in this case, what can you infer from source A about Russian life in 1900? Now, the first thing you do when you look at this source is you think, right, okay, what can I see? Okay, so at the top here, you've got the Tsar and the Tsarina. Right at the top, it says, we will rule over you. Then you've got people who look like they're sort of rich, and it says, we will govern you. Then it's the priests, we will pray for you. Then it looks like the army, who are saying, we will shoot you. Then it looks like sort of businessmen who are saying, we will eat for you. And then finally, loads and loads of people sort of trapped at the bottom where it says, we feed you. And if you know anything about Russian society, you'll know that very few people had lots of money, and there were lots and lots of poor people at the bottom who were the peasants and the workers. But what you've got to do is you've got to infer something. So, for example, what can I infer from source A about Russian life in 1900? Was Russian life was unfair or unequal. How do I know this? Because at the top of the source, at the top of the pyramid, you have very small groups of people who are richly clothed, who have lots. And at the bottom, you have loads of people sort of dressed in rags who don't look very happy. And therefore, it's very, very unequal. Another thing you could infer about Russian life in 1900 is that the peasants and the workers did everything to hold up or to prop up society. How do we know this? Because physically they're shown as holding up the pyramid that looks a bit like a wedding cake. So 2 inferences, and then how do you know that from the source? Okay, again, this is a 4-mark question. The first question you'll face in your Russia exam. What can you infer from source A about the role of Rasputin in damaging the rule of the Tsar? Now, this is Rasputin. and then you have the Tsar Nicholas II and the Tsarina on the right-hand side. So you need to make two inferences about how the role of Rasputin damaged the rule of Nicholas II. Now, as you can see, Rasputin is much larger than the Tsar and Tsarina. He's also carrying them in each hand. Now, what does this suggest? This suggests that somehow Rasputin is controlling the Tsar and the Tsarina. So one inference I could make would be that Rasputin damaged the rule of Nicholas II because the people thought Rasputin was controlling the Tsar and Tsarina. How do I know this? Because Rasputin is twice the size of the Tsar and Tsarina, and they look like little children or puppets in his hand. A second inference that I could make is if you look closely at the Tsarina and her eyes, she is looking up at Rasputin and not looking across at her husband, the Tsar. Now, what can you infer from this? I can infer that the Rasputin damaged the rule of the Nicholas II because the Tsarina was expected to have an affair with Rasputin. Now, during World War I, when the Tsarina was left in charge, this affair with Rasputin caused the Tsar lots of trouble, and that's a lovely inference that you could make for this source.